Welcome to my review of Lunar Dragon Song, and I'll be honest, I don't have a script written for this video. Every time I try to write a script, I start to get frustrated because I don't feel what I'm writing is good enough. I don't like where I'm starting from, and I don't like how it's ended. I can't seem to get a continuous train of thought going that I feel happy with, and so I decided I'd try vlogging, and I've been failing at that for over an hour now too. I can't seem to be satisfied with whatever I do when it comes to this game, and I don't know why, because the game itself is disappointing, so I would argue it doesn't really deserve a very good quality review to explain why it fails so bad. Because the game itself has been out for almost a decade now, so it's not like I'm providing some new discovery about why the game fails or anything. I guess you could argue the game doesn't fail completely, but the few things it gets right aren't enough to save the game from being a very below average title. Lunar Dragon Song was released back in 2005, and was panned by critics and fans alike for the most part. Yes, there are some fans that genuinely like this game, but for most, this is the black sheep of the Lunar series. And this is the first Lunar game I've ever played to completion, and some would tell me that that's a horrible problem because this is definitely not the best foot forward for this franchise, and I'm missing out on two classic games if I never go and play those. It's even worse when you consider I have the PSP port of the first game, and I haven't spent more than a couple hours on it. So I definitely could get a better idea what the Lunar series is about if I was inclined to after playing this game, not once but twice, because this would be the second time I've tried reviewing it. I've done a text review, and now I'm trying to do a video review. On the story side of things, Lunar Dragon Song is highly disappointing to me. Not so much in its messages, because those are good things that it tries to put forward. I mean, I understand why it wants to go with the ending it did somewhat, because it wants to argue that violence begets violence, hatred begets hatred. These are things that I definitely can agree with and get behind. But at the same time, it comes at the expense of your understanding of games when you have an ending like this. You're always supposed to fight the final boss. When you don't involve the player with fighting the final boss, it undermines the game and creates a very disappointing ending. Not fighting the final boss in this game is a final nail in the coffin, in my opinion, for why this game isn't very good. It also doesn't help that it tries to hammer home many of its messages about racism or the need for keep your allies with you. These are things that people obviously know are wrong, and you might argue that we fail at getting rid of racism. And I will agree that it's impossible for humans to remove their own biases completely or completely accept others that are not like themselves. But hammering it home the way the game does begins to feel insulting in some cases, especially when it comes to the whole you should stick with your comrades thing. I realize that in Japan this has a lot of importance, but at the same time treating Gene as a character that's too stupid to realize he should keep his allies close to him and be with his friends as much as possible begins to become a frustrating plot point for me after the first time. After the first time this is brought up, it should not be repeated. This isn't a plot point that needed to be repeated 2 additional times, in my opinion. On the good side of the story, there is some decent characterization here. The characters are clearly defined, and we get to see some struggles when it comes to Gabby, because she's been sent out to recruit people, knowing that they're probably going to die in an attempt to take down the final boss, and she's still going to have to do it anyway, because it's her job as a princess. I guess, yeah, Gabby is the princess of the royal family of the Beastmen, so if she's stuck in a pretty shitty position and has to somehow come to terms with it, it's definitely interesting characterization of the character, showing her that she's willing to go forward and to do what she has to do, but obviously showing that it's definitely broken her spirit in ways. And that's a good thing. It's too bad that it has to be wasted with the story that ends the way it does. On the gameplay side of things, this game is a complete mess. The first issue you'll notice almost instantly when playing this game is that it punishes you for running by depleting your HP. I could get behind this if this happened in the field when there's enemies running around, because the game's punishing you then for trying to avoid combat. So at least it could make some sense why you'd lose HP, because you're not paying attention to objects as you run away from the monsters. But it doesn't make any sense to do this when you're in an area that's been cleared of monsters or in town. There's no reason I should be losing HP when I run around town at all, because there's nothing to fight there, so there's no reason for me being a super rush, just going a bit faster than normal. The game almost forces you to walk in the early stages, and this isn't very acceptable in my opinion at all to anyone. This is something that everyone harps on the most when it comes to this game in my experience, and I can understand why, because it was a very poor decision no matter how I slice it. Another poor decision comes with the fact that you can't choose your own attack target. This goes against RPG basics. Or basics in any game, to be honest. You should always be able to choose your target. The fact that you can't means the game's trying to streamline itself more than even Final Fantasy XIII did. And people hated the streamlining in Final Fantasy XIII in many cases because they feel it took away from the strategy of turn-based combat or even the active time battle system. And while I might have my issues with the active time battle system because I feel it tries to force the player to make decisions quickly and rushes them, because I really don't like to feel rushed when I play video games, it feels worse with this game because I feel like I don't have much control over combat at all. It's almost like the game wants you to hit auto attack and then end things by just holding the shoulder button to make things go faster. It makes the gameplay feel very uninvolved when it comes to combat. And this ties into another issue. When it comes to combat, you can either get experience or items. You can't get both at the same time. And this is problematic because it creates an issue where you have to grind twice. You also don't earn any money from combat. You can only earn items and experience. You need to get items to complete jobs to get money. But the items you get from combat are relatively random, because sometimes even if items are available, you won't get them. So you can spend hours sometimes just trying to complete one job if you're very unlucky. And it's just not very acceptable, in my opinion, to set the system up like this. The game shouldn't have been designed this way. It tries to streamline the game in a way that just ends up undermining and hurting it more than it needed to. The best way to avoid this issue altogether is just say stick with experience, then wait till you get to the port obliged, or I pronounce it, to buy the items you need for certain jobs and complete the ones that you can only have to buy stuff for. Of course, you're going to have to do some item grinding anyway, because you're going to get cards out of them from the various monsters, and these have abilities you're really going to want to use in some of the boss fights, because they can up your stats and decrease the enemy stats. They almost define combat, to be honest. You'll largely ignore using spells from your own healer, even though they come with support abilities, because you're going to favor the cards more because they're less costly to replace. Because MP in this game there's very few items that replace it, and even the cards that replace it also have very limited uses. And if you're spamming MP to get through areas, you're going to run out very quickly. The game has basically made magic extremely overpowered, but at the same time you have such small MP pools, you can't really take advantage of it too much. So I guess you can call it an up and down point, because the game tries to counterbalance itself. I don't think it completely succeeds, considering you can still try to avoid most combats. But at least it was trying to balance things out. Point to you, game, I guess. I guess I don't have too many other bad things to say about the gameplay, but it's hard to think of anything good to say about the gameplay. I mean, I guess I could talk about the cards more specifically, because there are flaws with that system too, in my opinion. For one thing, you can't replace a card until after you completely emptied out every spell usage you can get out of it. This was a bad decision, in my opinion. Even if you want to argue you can't restock, you can't carry multiple copies of the cards because they become overpowered and broken in a system that's potentially breakable as it is already. Not being able to restock the card until you completely spend it means that if you have one charge left, you can't replace it until you use up that one charge. And this feels like a poor design decision, in my opinion, because that means you have to spend spell charges in order to replace them. Because you may want to have a full charge before you go into a boss battle. So the game's creating more busy work for the player, which is what the whole delivery job system is. It's padding to give the game extra length, in my opinion. To give it that extra push towards being a 30, 40-hour length-long RPG. Length should not be associated with quality, and I feel the game made that mistake when it streamlined the way it did. Yeah, I know, now I'm going off on tangents, but whatever. Graphically speaking, the game got its ups and downs. On one hand, I do like the classic look and feel it has going for itself. On the other hand, the way the combat screen is set up is a bad idea. By having enemies on both the top and bottom screens, it can lead to enemies being split in half. This happens to pretty much all the bosses, and it's highly annoying. It's a poor decision on their part to have done it the way they did, especially if you're going to have such massive enemies that get split between the screens. I guess I can't really do anything to change that decision, but I can complain about it. Sound wise, uh, sound wise, the game's pretty solid. Though I guess that's not a surprise. I mean, they do have a classic series trying to continue, so they should definitely pick out some quality music. But it's not enough to carry a game. Like I said, the few good things we have going on for ourselves here, from the story, for like characterization and good messages and themes, is still crippled by bad gameplay decisions all over the place. I guess you can argue you can get around a lot of the bad gameplay choices with patience, but your average player isn't going to have the patience to work their way through this game, in my experience. I mean, I've done that with games like Tribal Stance. I've worked my way through it and had to spend almost 5 hours trying to crack how to play that game, but your average person doesn't want to spend hours trying to figure out how to play a game in a way that works well. It should be somewhat obvious how to play a game on many levels. Okay, you want to give the player a good foundation to work with. Lunar Dragon Song basically builds itself around a card system, but unless you're aware of this or spend a lot of time messing with the cards, you're probably not going to have the best way to beat the bosses available to you, and are going to quickly get frustrated. There's some other tricks you can also keep in mind, like how overpowered Jian's special attacks are and stuff, but again, it feels like there's balancing issues, and RPG basics aren't followed. Is Lunar Dragon Song the worst game ever made? No. Is it the worst RPG I've ever played? No. Is it a highly flawed game that is disappointing to almost everyone that plays it? Yes. Are there fans that genuinely like this game? Yes, but they're far and few between. Even the fans that apparently like this game would still tell me that this is not a game they'd recommend to be your introduction into the Lunar franchise, because it definitely leaves a bad impression for most people. It definitely sets up a bad impression for me when it comes to Silver Star Harmony, because now I have the idea that I'm going to get to the final boss battle, and I'm not actually going to probably be able to fight the final boss. I mean, it's setting up disappointment before I even play the game. But I guess I should end it here, because I've been going on for about 12 and a half minutes now, and some of this is getting to the point where it's just rambling pointlessly. Until next time, see ya.